The University of Connecticut releases details about its financial status during the ongoing pandemic. Norwich Police hold a Coffee with Cops event with the community after recent George Floyd protests to begin the conversations about how they can understand each other better. Plus, a look at some of the top stories from around the region. This is Connecticut East This Week. Hello, I'm Brian Scott Smith. The COVID-19 pandemic has turned the world we know upside down. From business to education, everything has had to change and adapt. With the need to get people back to work and back to school, tough decisions are being made about how to do it safely and within budget when the money that's been there before has dried up. Our higher education schools are affected like everyone else, and I caught up with Stephanie Reitz, a spokesperson for UConn in stores, to find out more. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused issues with many industries. Education has not been unaffected, and UConn is seeing a shortfall, quite a large shortfall in its funds. How will that potentially affect services and students?
Well, I think higher education, not just in Connecticut, but nationally, has been in a changing mode in the last several years, and in fact, in the last decade, because state and government support has been decreasing here and everywhere. So we don't want to become too tuition dependent. You certainly don't want students and their families carrying the majority of the load if you can help it. But what we have found here is that we already were struggling with that balance before the pandemic occurred. And now we have the additional questions of how to best deliver the highest quality education under circumstances where you may not be able to bring your students to campus. This is particularly the case with our international students because some of them have returned to their home. We have a particularly large contingent of international students from China, and it's very difficult for them to get back. So they may or may not come back in the fall. For us, that's a good financial hit if they do not. And also, from the aspect of looking at our student body, our international students bring really wonderful experience and diversity to our campus. So we really would love to have them back if possible. Even on the domestic side, we may have students coming from another state where there is a mandatory quarantine when they return. For instance, I'm thinking of Florida or Texas. And if those students come back and are expected to quarantine for 14 days, will they do that? Will they want to come back, or will they decide to take a gap year? And those are all questions right now that we don't know the answer to. And they are all things that play into our financial picture, because if they don't return and we don't get the tuition from those students, then we have to adjust what we offer to everyone else.
Everyone has had to adjust to distance or remote learning. How much of a challenge has that been for UConn? And of course, it's not an inexpensive thing to do. I mean, people think it's an easy transition. It isn't.
No, we were lucky at UConn that we already had a pretty active department that was helping some professors do this. We had more than 150 online courses before the pandemic struck, so we were very fortunate to have a model and to have some professors who were very comfortable with it and could be mentors and assistants to other professors. But certainly it lends itself better in some disciplines than in others. For instance, maybe in math or something like that, when everybody can look on the same screen and discuss the same theories, that may be, I don't want to say it's easier for one than for the other, but when everybody is looking at and thinking through the same problems. But then there are others, I'm thinking maybe philosophy. If you have a class of 20 students and you ask a question and you've got one person's hand is raised virtually and 19 people are waiting to talk, are you going to get to hear all of those voices on a video conference? You would hope so, and you would try to, but logistically, it's a very different animal. And I think people also just respond differently on a conference call than they would in person. There's a level of familiarity and comfort of going to the same classroom and seeing the same faces, as opposed to sitting in your living room and hoping that your cats don't fight behind you or that you don't have an internet problem. So it's a different animal. And I am proud to say that we did not have to cancel any of our courses. We were able to continue and move everything online. There were glitches. I will be honest and say there were glitches here, I'm sure everywhere as well. But we were able to provide students with the education they paid for and to graduate our graduating seniors. That being said, there's always room for improvement. And this summer, a lot of our faculty have been looking at ways to kind of revamp and restructure what they're offering if they're going to do it online in the fall.
Students can be very opinionated, of course. What sort of feedback have you been getting from them?
Well, and the students and the university are on the same page on this. They want to be back. I think it was novel for everyone at the beginning to realize that we can do things online. Honestly, the victory of conquering new technology is exciting for maybe the first day. But, they go to college because they want to go to college. They don't want to be in their room at home or in their mom's basement or something like that. And so overwhelmingly, what we've heard from our students is that when and if it is safe to be back on campus, that's what they want. They want an in-person learning and living experience.
President issued a letter fairly recently. Can you talk us through a little bit about it? I know there's a lot of detail in there. Some people may be a little bit concerned about what was in there. So just, clarify for us, what does it actually mean?
Do you mean the letter about financial?
The furloughs of the staff.
Furloughs, yes. The president on June 19th informed the administrative ranks and the higher level managers of mandatory furloughs, unpaid days off of work. For the highest level people, the president and the cabinet members, vice presidents, that would be 24 days in the coming 12 months. That's about a 10% cut for those employees. And for the next level, which is associate and assistant vice presidents, they would take 12 furlough days, which is the equivalent of about a 5% pay cut. The university has also approached the unions that represent the staff and the faculty and have asked them informally to consider what would they look at in terms of concessions or assistance. And at this point, there aren't any agreements and there aren't active negotiations, but there are still discussions. So we don't know how that portion will play out. But it is definitely going to be a budget challenge. And a large percentage of UConn's budget is in personnel costs, in salary and fringe. So there's not a lot of other areas that you can cut without cutting into academic programs, cutting into supplies that are needed on campus. You really end up having to look at the personnel costs, which is very difficult. No one wants to jeopardize anybody's income or anybody's work status, but it is something that has to be looked at in these strange times.
Another area where you've had to make difficult decisions and cuts because of the budget is in the sports. I believe 4 sports recently were decided that they have to be sort of eliminated is a bit of a strong word, but they've had to be postponed for the time being. How difficult a decision, was that? Yeah,
and actually eliminated is the actual word. The anticipation right now is that they would not be returning anytime in the near future. The university's athletics division has been operating at a deficit for several years, so the university does supplement. It's been recently to the tune of about $40 million in the last year. It's very difficult because one of the things we've run across is that we were in a conference previously where we had to travel as far away as places like Boise, Idaho, and the travel costs alone became very expensive. You also depend on things like ad revenue and other pieces of the puzzle when it comes to your athletics revenue, tickets and so forth. And some of our sports have been very, very successful. Others less so. These things go on waves, I guess you could say. In this particular case, the Division of Athletics has been requested to reduce the subsidy that it requires from the university. So that was about a $10 million cut that was needed to be handled in the coming 3 to 5 years. It's worth noting that the athletic director himself took a pay cut. He voluntarily is taking a 15% pay cut and refusing any bonuses this year. So I do applaud him for that. I think that is a good leadership move to show that he's willing to also sacrifice. But in the meantime, the other 4 sports that have been cut are men's cross country, men's swimming and diving, women's rowing, and men's tennis. I can tell you from a personal perspective, I am a huge fan of men's swimming and diving. My son's swimming instructor is actually a member of the team, and I was devastated. And I'm not even on the team. So those of us at the university, we're devastated for these players. We absolutely did not want to do this. And those who are here on scholarships can stay here on their scholarships even after next year. Those sports will have their final competitive year coming up in this year, but those students can stay. We're not going to kick them out. If they decide they want to continue in their sport and transfer somewhere else, we'll assist them with that. But over the next 3 to 5 years, that will save about $10 million. And it was difficult. There's never any sport that is an easy one to change or adjust. And we get a lot of talk about football. People say, well, why don't you just get rid of football? At a Division I, Research I university, even if your football team maybe is not at the Rose Bowl that year, and we're not, it's a really key part of any sports program. And it wasn't that long ago that we were in a bowl, and hopefully it would be not that long from now that we'll be in one again. So we believe in that program. We believe it has better days to come, but we are recognizing that people look at it and want us to deliver. So in a lot of ways, we are really working to, I guess you could say, reformat and change around what we offer. Our students, for instance, can come to games free now. I say free meaning that their ticket price is actually part of a fee that they pay, but they're not paying now for a separate ticket as well. So there's a lot of ways we're hoping that the fan experience improves. But, I don't want anybody to feel that this was an easy thing. This was very, very hard for our athletic director. He knows these student athletes. He knows these coaches. And there was no easy answer to that one.
The other thing, of course, is the state does still give some money, but of course the state is having to look at its budget. So what's the sort of situation there? Is it a case of you have to have a constant conversation now with the state rather than maybe not as many conversations as you used to have in the past?
Well, actually, UConn has always had a constant conversation with the state because there's been a lot of give and take about ideas for growing the university in the appropriate way. For instance, our previous president and our previous governor worked together with others to talk about how to put together the Next Generation Connecticut Growth Plan, which is an initiative that we are about halfway through right now that is responsible for the growth and expansion of a lot of our science facilities on campus. And through our science facilities, we get a lot of our research, and through research, we get a lot of independent non-tuition money. So there's a wonderful return to that. So those are the kind of things we've been talking about all along, is to try to find income that is not dependent on state money and is not dependent on tuition. For instance, licenses, copyrights, that sort of thing. And the new governor also has been a wonderful supporter of UConn, and the legislature as well. The issue is that, like everyone else, they are dealing with a very shrinking pie and a lot of people coming to them with the plates. So we absolutely recognize and we appreciate what we do get from them. But we also want to continue to remind them of the value that the university brings to the state.
At the top of the conversation, you were saying about your international students and whether or not they'll come back. I mean, students is what a UConn is all about. Mm-hmm. You do, as I understand it, get a little bit more money if a student comes in from outside the state. Will you be sort of targeting more outside to try and sort of like build up the money, or was it a case of actually it's just going to be sort of like let's get as many students in from Connecticut, because either way we just need to make sure that we can get those budgets back on track. Is there any sort of thinking behind any of this?
There is. We have traditionally had at least 70% of our undergraduate student body being from Connecticut, and we don't expect that to change. We really don't want this to become a university that has a small percentage from the home state. Our view is that the University of Connecticut is the flagship of Connecticut. It should be the aspirational institution for our valedictorians, our salutatorians, and we hope and expect that that will continue. That's the mission that we seek, is to continue to have the great majority of our students being from Connecticut. And that being said, though, we have fantastic students coming from out of state. Again, valedictorians and salutatorians, they do pay a higher amount. Those from overseas pay a higher amount as well. They don't qualify for institutional aid. So the income from international students does help to pay the freight to some degree for our in-state students and helps to support our financial aid for our needy students. We also this year launched a new program called the Connecticut Commitment, which provides free tuition covered to in-state needy students who qualify, who are accepted to the university, whose family income is less than $50,000. That's very important to us because we have found that a lot of really talented, really promising students who come from modest means just didn't even apply to UConn. They and their families said, well, I can't afford that. Why should I even bother? So we hope that we're able to continue to get those students to apply as well and to come, because they really make up a great part of the student body as well.
The future obviously is bright for UConn. I mean, we don't want to paint a doom and gloom picture. I mean, clearly you've been around for a long time. You're going to continue to be around for a long time. Is there a sense of how long, you're going to be in this sort of slightly transitory state? I mean, because, we see things in the media about, non-educational organisations, and they're quoting, 1, 2, 3 years for organisations to get back on their feet. Is there a sort of an idea as to, for UConn at least, what this actually means by way of getting back to what is the normal, if indeed there is a normal?
Yeah, I think we are going to be going into what I would call a new normal. Now that we know that we can deliver academics remotely, there may be times, for instance, in the past, we would have times when maybe we had to take 2 or 3 days off for snow days. And that may be something of the past. We may be able to have remote learning days in place of inclement weather days. It's hard for us to predict, though, if this is going to be something that is in the rearview mirror in 3 years or 5 years or 2 years. It really is going to depend on what goes on both with the pandemic, with our state, with the country and the world as a whole economically, particularly what goes on with our enrollment trends. And really, I think higher ed as a whole is in a very big momentum shift right now to kind of figure out how do we provide what we promise while we have limited resources. So I don't know that anybody can really put their thumb on it. I would love if Nostradamus can tell us, but at this point, we're trying to ride it out with the best information we have available. We've been here since 1881, and as the previous president would always say, the university is forever. So I hope and believe that in the next 100 years, we may look back on this and say, well, that was a strange thing that university got through, but they got through that, so we'll get through whatever the next challenge is.
Stephanie Reitz from the University of Connecticut. Ever so many thanks for the interview.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Protests and rallies continue in the country after the killing of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police. Here in Connecticut, every major city has seen some form of rally, mostly peaceful, calling for an end to racism and police brutality towards black and brown communities. In Norwich recently, both sides came together at an event at Foundry 66, a co-working space in the downtown area, to begin conversations to try and establish trust and understanding. The 2-hour event was attended by around 50 people, a mixture of the local community and Norwich police officers, and there were some tough questions to answer and hard conversations had, and the results were positive. Here's a small extract from the opening of the event by Norwich Community Police Officer Nick Rankin and local resident and moderator Richard Thompson.
Thanks everyone for being here, first of all. We had a lot of turnout at the protests. They were largely... They were just reasonable. People came out and they said, hey, we have issue. We're taking issue with police at large. Some people were taking issue with Norwich police, but they did it in a way that was nonviolent. That's all that we ask. That's what our First Amendment's all about, right? You can show up. You can express your displeasure with the government. You can express your displeasure with whatever it is. We did our best in those cases to just block traffic for people, make sure no one got hurt. We're public safety officials. That's our job. We didn't spend a lot of time in that forum talking to people, expressing our own opinions on any of the issues at hand. I think what you're going to find when we get to talking and we get to talking to each other and some of these officers that are here today is that we look for reforms similarly to everyone else. So I jotted some notes down today about what I think this ought to be. We've done Coffee with a Cop before. I don't know if anyone's been to it, but mostly what Coffee with a Cop has been in the past, at least from our perspective, is, hey, we want to go give people an opportunity to sit with us where we don't have to listen to a radio, run out of the room, anything like that. We advertise a little bit, say, hey, we're going to be at this coffee shop at this time. You're more than welcome to come in, talk to our officers about anything you'd like. And what winds up happening really is like people kind of wander in and they buy their coffee in the morning and they go, what are you doing here? And, right? And then maybe they sit down and they have a small conversation. We kind of wanted to take that idea. Lexi brought it up. She said, hey, what do you think about doing Coffee with a Cop again? I said, yeah, I think that's fine. Let's just pick a place where people are there because they came there for that, as opposed to stumbled upon a cop unprepared for that moment and thought up a question on the spot. So we came up with this idea. I spoke with her about, hey, I think that that's the right medium. We want to have long-form, individual conversation with our citizens. As we've seen it right now, we kind of wind up saying the safest possible thing that we can think of because there's going to be a camera in our face, or it's going to be chopped up into 30-second clips, and people worry. And I think that happens to regular, everyday citizens just as much as it happens to us. We get soundbited, we get chopped up into something that doesn't fully express ourselves. So that's how we came up with the idea of doing this today. It's admittedly more of a forum style than I expected. It wasn't exactly what I envisioned, but we spoke, and I think we're on the same page about what we want to happen today. And I'm sure you'll be giving them kind of the ground rules and stuff like that.
I wanted Lexi she kind of beat me to the punch, but no, it's perfectly okay. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Richard Thompson. I run a business here in the Foundry called Rubberware Apparel. It's a faith-based clothing line and custom apparel company. I've been a long-standing citizen of Norwich. I've been living in Connecticut for over 10 years. I just recently moved back to Norwich, but I've been in the Norwich area pretty much about that same amount of time. I am a former military. I got out of the Navy and just made Connecticut my home. I have a daughter of my own, and I'm at a point where I saw fit to kind of get involved with the community more than I was before. So when I was asked by Suki to facilitate this discussion, I jumped at it. I think open dialogue is how all problems are resolved, is the best way to resolve them. I think that when we sit down and we discuss things as human beings and we listen and not to respond, I think that we can come up with real solutions and come real problems. I was expressing to Sergeant Rankin that if we as a community can come together and the police can better understand us as a community individually and we can better understand them, then there's less issues and less likely of a chance to have somebody's rights violated, have somebody accidentally killed, to have an officer aggressively attacked, or on social media or whatever the case may be, or even lose their job. You see what I'm saying? All for something that could have been resolved with a stronger relationship. So that's kind of what we're here today. They're here to get to know us, we're here to get to know them, and understand their job a little bit better, and they're to understand us.
During the event, I spoke with Lexi Samad, a Norwich resident and one of the organisers, and asked her what the community had been saying to people like her about the current situation. There is a disconnect between the community and the police, and when it comes to the black community, that disconnect is probably even wider than it is with other parts of the community. So what are they saying to you?
So I haven't heard much from the younger generation about it. They're kind of just generally scared of cops. They have this very bad view of police in general. And to be honest, I kind of did prior to this as well, prior to meeting with them and getting to know them. But now that I've gotten to know them, I'm more comfortable with them. Like it's a more comfortable interaction. So so from the younger people, they're kind of just afraid, which is why there's a couple young people in there, but not many. So one of the goals for their future is to try to get them more involved. But from older people, it really has just been the disconnect. Like they don't really trust them. They don't really like them per se. But I spoke to a random person the other day, and he was like, it just feels like they don't want to get to know us. But from the Norwich Police Department's perspective, after talking to Officer Rankin, he was like, the community police force has tried to, just go out randomly and talk to people, and people are like grabbing their kids and like stay away from them. So that's what we're going to try to do. This is going to be a series. This isn't the one and only time we're going to do this. So
one of the other things that probably doesn't happen as much here in the US as it does in like other countries, and I'm referencing my own country and I used to live in the UK, is the Bobby on the beat, i.e. the cop actually walking around, not just being in a car all the time and driving around, because it's very easy to drive around in a car and drive around in a neighborhood and you're not connecting with anybody. You're visible, but you're not actually connecting with anybody. Do you think it would be good to see the police walking around areas more, getting out of their cars? Because perhaps that's part of the problem, is that people see them, but then they drive off and, as you say, no connection again is made because they're just driving around and not actually actively engaging with the community.
Yeah, so a couple things about that. I think a huge problem is them like introducing themselves. That's an issue. But also, one of the things that I definitely wanted to try to do was expand the community police force. To my understanding, there's only about 4 or 5 community police officers on the Norwich Police Department, and I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it needs to be, every officer needs to have a certain amount of hours that he's out in the community, whether it's on his bike or going to play basketball, you know what I mean, and not driving around in their cars, like you said. So I think it's a work in progress. I think we'll definitely get there. The death of George Floyd obviously has put a light on this subject, and I think it's the time to make these sort of changes. So, yeah.
Social skills. They may be trained in dealing with things, but, I've spoken to police officers in the past, and sometimes they have trouble, with that, one-on-one communication. So, and we're not talking about cultural sensitivity here. We're talking about just being able to speak to another human being. Do you think that they need to be trained in how to actually communicate?
Yeah, I think that plays a huge role in their jobs, and I don't think they have the proper training when it comes to that. But also, that's just kind of like normal human interaction. So I don't know, if you can't like interact with a human normally, I don't think you should really be a cop per se. So I think that goes back to the academies, and I think it definitely starts there with that. So you just actually gave me a good idea. Like, that's a step that we definitely need to take, is talking to the academies and seeing like, okay, like what are they trained to do before they go out into the force. So that's a great point. I didn't even think about that, because I don't think they have any sort of training on that now. So that needs to be fixed.
My thanks to Lexi and the Norwich Police Department, and a series of community and COP events are being planned to keep the dialogue going, and we'll keep you posted on developments. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making the headlines in the region recently. And in the day this week, Eric Garner's mother speaks at Ocean Beach Park event. Gwen Carr, the mother of Eric Garner, whose 2014 death sparked the I Can't Breathe police reform movement, had been invited by the New London branch of the NAACP to speak. The 70-year-old, whose son died after a New York City police officer placed him in a chokehold, stood before the estimated gathering of more than 100 people of all ages and backgrounds and said she was proud to be there. In the Norwich Bulletin, the Department of Corrections say that nearly half of the Brooklyn prison population has tested positive for coronavirus. The testing, the first such mass initiative undertaken by the department, began on May 13th. The testing yielded 832 positive cases among the 9,500 prisoners tested in 14 facilities, including those in Uncasville and Brooklyn. And in the Chronicle this week, elementary school consolidation is being considered. To best support students and provide the most equitable staffing structures, Wyndham school officials are considering consolidating elementary schools. The Wyndham Board of Education met recently to explore possibilities of an elementary school consolidation for the 2021-22 year. And it's official, there will be no Big E this year due to COVID-19. The 104-year-old fair in West Springfield, Mass. Is being called off for the health and safety of the 1.6 million people who support it each year. Next year's Big E is scheduled for September 17th to October 3rd, 2021. That's all from us for this edition. Do send us your questions and story ideas to the show via our website at connecticut-east.com or Facebook or Twitter at Connecticut East, where you can also listen to the show again on demand. And please like, follow and share on your social media platforms too. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thanks for listening.